Hello and welcome to the stream. I'm Ahmed Shahabuddin. On today's show, the fight to keep carbon in the ground. Last month, climate activists were evicted from the German village of Lutzerath. Thousands had joined in occupying the area to stop the expansion of an open-pit coal mine. We'll catch up with those involved in the movement and ask how such campaigns are impacting how people relate to the global climate emergency. As always, your comments and questions are a welcome part of this program, so just jump into our live YouTube chat and be a part of the show. Joining us from Dortmund, Germany, Dina Hamid, a university student and environmental activist who lived in Lutzerath until the recent police eviction. In Dusseldorf, Maria Inti Metzendorf, a health information scientist and a member of Scientist Rebellion. And in Berlin, Alexander Grevel, an environmental activist. So many questions for you all, but I'm going to start with the basic one. Let's talk about your feelings, Alexander. What frustrates you most about what's happening there, and specifically about the new planned coal mine that's set for expansion?
I guess the most thing, or what struggles me most, is the fact that in Germany we value our energy security to be more important than human lives in the global south. So this is my main concern is this moment that by our energy politics we are basically killing people in the global south.
Well, that's very succinct and certainly something that all of us can understand. I'm wondering, Alexander, the government, which includes the Green Party as part of that coalition, agreed to the mine expansion on the condition that the energy firm would phase out coal 8 years earlier than planned in the western state of North Rhine-Westphalia. So they view this compromise as a win. Do you? Is it a win?
No, it's not about the year when we exit the coal firing. It's about the amount of CO2 that we release into the atmosphere. If we release in a shorter time period the higher amount of CO2 in the atmosphere, then this earlier year is meaningless to me, actually.
So meaningless is an interesting term. Dina, you living there for 2 years, I can imagine, was certainly not meaningless. I want to know, camping out there, putting your body on the line. Al Jazeera, of course, followed your last day there before police whisked you away and evicted everybody. I'm curious, what was it like for you, and what's your takeaway in all of this?
We built the village of Lutzerath for 2.5 years, so what was really important to us is not only protesting against the coal, which of course needs to stay in the ground, but also living a life in solidarity, living a life where we can get a feeling for what the climate just world we're trying to make might look like, right? So that's something that we fought for and that can't be taken from us even now, although we lost the place. And I think that even though the village is gone, the coal still is in the ground, and that's something that we can still fight for.
So maybe that's a small win right there. And I'm curious, in the meantime, Maria Inti, because I asked Alexander about his feelings, I want to ask you about yours. I mean, how were you personally affected by the protests?
Yeah, so my feelings are along the line of Alexander's, because basically what I really find hard to understand is why Germany, a country which is, technologically very advanced, is not enhancing, not scaling up the renewable energy, and instead is still trying to secure their energy with dirty coal, lignite, which is the most detrimental coal type that we have. As a scientist, it's really hard to believe why we're still clinging on to this technology, to this old technology, instead of jumping on the newer ones.
Well, I mean, that's the question, right? So many of us are concerned about the climate emergency, but so many of us don't really understand perhaps what the immediate steps should be, or there's not, at least I should say, consensus on that. I do want to share with our audience as well as with you another concern that a lot of people have about what was happening there in the village, in terms of the police brutality and what, the images that the world sort of witnessed. We have a video that was sent to us from Tino Pfaff talking about the police brutality at the protest. Take a look.
As a participant of the protests in Lutzerath and who has seen thousands of police violence, I think I've seen half of thousand bleeding noses, bleeding locations on heads. I'm very irritated of the most reports in German media. At myself, I was attacked by 4 police officers without any reason, and in 3 cases, they punched me in my face. I think the media get the impressions that was a violent mass of protesters, but it's not true. The scenes remind me on a brawl that got out of control on this day. With one difference, and the difference is we were unarmed and peaceful, and the police groups, how can I say, were like wild hooligan groups when they went a hunt.
Dina, like wild hooligan groups when they want to hunt. I'm curious, if we look at this photo of you that I think this is the last day when you were being escorted out, essentially evicted. You have a smile on your face. I wonder how you were feeling and what your thoughts were in this moment and what your thoughts are about the future of how to fight against this.
If I'm going to be totally honest with you, when that photo was taken 2 minutes ago, I was sitting in the house. I was evicted from crying because I had just experienced pain grips from the police. And that was only one part of the police brutality. I mean, we just heard it. And we from the protest took our time to really get a grasp of what happened in terms of police brutality. And we counted many injuries to the head, especially, and to the kidneys, which is really dangerous, as well as, at least 15 hospitalized people, at least 10 broken bones. And that's just from the little bit of feedback that we got from people. And I think that what this really shows is, many people in Germany and beyond were shocked by the pictures of police violence being out in the open on the field. Mm-hmm. But police violence is a live reality for many people everywhere, especially for poor people, for marginalized people, for Black people. And we know this. And this is how the police works in our state. It acts to protect state interests, and in this case, corporate interests of RWE.
So I see that you're nodding, Maria, into what was making you nod? I know there's so many questions about, for example, a basic one. Does energy security actually have to be achieved with coal? And I'm wondering if you can explain to our audience, in the most simple terms, what is really wrong with this particular mine and coal mining in general?
Well, so basically, as I already mentioned before, lignite is the dirtiest form of coal. So it has a lot of health impacts, not only while it is being burned, which is something that most people will understand. If you burn coal, you generate air pollution, so fine particulate matter that is not only relevant around the plant, but is also taken away and is polluting the air much more further away than the original plant. So we have this air pollution component that is a problem when you burn the coal. We also have the problem close to the mine. So already while being excavated, the excavation process causes this air pollution and also releases mercury. Mm-hmm. And mercury is it's very bad for your health. So we have these 2 main components. We have the fine particulate matter mm-hmm. that impacts your lungs, that impacts your cardiovascular system, and we have the mercury as well. So we have cerebral damage to prolonged exposure. We have different problems with the heart, and of course with your lung function, and cancers that are associated with the prolonged exposure.
Mm.
And if I may
Dina,
add,
please, Dina,
I
go
was
ahead.
nodding originally. Sorry.
No,
I
please.
was nodding originally because I very much agree with what Dina said. Like, we don't need this coal to secure Germany's energy system. And the government is actually doing this to secure profits. And as a scientist, I cannot accept this, you know. I want our government to secure our health and our livable future, not only for people in Germany, but for people worldwide. So we do have studies that show that the coal beneath Lutzerath and the coal of the Garzweiler mine is not needed for energy security. And I just want to mention that a lot of people already know this, and that is why we saw protests that were so big.
Dina, you were going to say something?
exactly, just what Maria said. I mean, the thing is that the government, including the Green Party, which only 2 years ago were protesting along our side so that all villages can stay and so that the coal will stay in the ground, they're now trying to find their way discursively out of protecting RWE's profits at the end of the day by selling this idea that people should be afraid of blackouts or that, basically we have an energy scarcity, but we're not really looking at what people need there. And especially we're not looking at what Alexander said in the beginning, we're not looking at the global majority. What people need is for us to get out of all fossil fuels now, and that especially includes lignite. And so I think that the Green Party especially was really just shaking in their knees, and that's the reason why they did the eviction so quickly and so brutally.
Right, and speaking of the global majority, I'm glad that you brought that up. Alexander, I see you raising your hand, but before I come to you, I want to share with you all, the international view of Germany, for better or worse, is that they're progressive, that they're seen as leaders on the international stage, especially when it comes to the climate emergency. So, they're telling a lot of developing countries that they need to decarbonize, and yet they're turning back to coal. It's a bit puzzling, and in fact, we have a video comment that was sent to us by Nyombi Morris that kind of outlines some of this for us. Take a listen.
What we are witnessing in Germany today is a walk of shame to all global north countries that pretend to support communities which are being affected by climate change, but they can't phase out the root cause of this crisis. Scientists have been clear, science is clear, global south countries are clear that the root cause of the climate crisis has been fossil fuel on multiple occasions. We need to keep carbon in the ground because we are witnessing record-breaking temperature rises every year, and countries that have contributed the biggest percentage have continued to lie to us in every climate conferences that they are ready to go renewable, they are ready to invest in clean energy. We are tired of words. We need actions.
So, Alexander, I was watching you nod in agreement with Nyombi there as he was speaking, and I'm curious if you agree that what is happening there is actually putting Germany potentially at odds with some of the goals that they've been espousing on the international stage, specifically their pledge to become carbon neutral by 2045, as well as to cut 65% of emissions by 2030 compared with 1990. Why were you nodding?
I mean, first of all, 2045 is far too late to get neutral with CO2 and all emissions that work in our atmosphere. So, but why I'm nodding was that he was completely right on what he's saying, that we don't give a good example at the moment. We demand that all countries change to renewables, and instead we are going back in the next fossil lock-in, because we had been in a carbon lock-in for the last 10 to 15 years by getting our coal and gas from Russia, and now we go really to the next lock-in by importing this dirty LNG gas from other countries, and there we haven't spoken about methane so far, which is 100-fold more effective in our atmosphere, and this is really, really toxic to move now to LNG gas instead of coal.
Most certainly, and obviously it should be mentioned that obviously the EU is facing, the EU is facing an energy crisis, and so it certainly does need cheaper energy sources. But with that in mind, I'm curious, how can I put this? It seems almost, Maria Inti, as if we're talking about even nuclear. We've now mentioned LNG, but nuclear, if I'm not mistaken, is still a fossil fuel. I mean, a lot of the comments in our YouTube chat, for example, Ayub Riaz is saying, I wonder why Germany, a country technologically well advanced, is turning to coal energy. This is as they were predicting their advanced status among EU countries in the sector of renewable energy. Olivier Amania saying, what's preventing Germany from switching to nuclear energy? After all, it's not some poor developing country. So is it really just about profit? I mean, do they need coal in the context of what's happening in Ukraine and Russia?
So let me just correct some things here. First, nuclear is not a fossil fuel. It's a different kind of technology.
See, that's why you're here, to enlighten us and correct me. Continue.
And the other thing is, Germany is not expanding on coal. It has always relied on coal. So coal never moved out of our energy sector. We're just reinforcing it now instead of delving into the renewables. And nuclear is not a safe option. So in Germany, we've had a very strong movement already in the 1980s that was against nuclear power, because nuclear power is considered to be a very unsafe technology. So if you have problems with nuclear power, you have them on a global level. We've seen that with the Fukushima accident. So basically in Germany, nuclear is not considered a good alternative. We have a strong belief in the society that this is not an energy that is, it's not an energy that we should, build our energy sector upon. So the fossil fuels need to go. Nuclear energy is not a safe option. We really need to scale up the renewables, and Germany has the technology. We just need to get rid of laws that are blocking the expansion of renewables, because the past governments have failed to get rid of these bureaucratic laws.
I appreciate that correction, and it's funny, my dad's a nuclear physicist, so he's probably going to be very ashamed that I mentioned that. But that's only a side note. I want to mention to you, Dina, we saw the footage of you earlier being escorted out. As we explained to our viewers, you spent 2 years there. I'm curious, by putting your body on the line there and all the activists that were on the ground, I mean, do you think this has changed? Dina, do you think this has changed the way that people relate to the climate emergency? I mean, does this help influence how ordinary people might view their own sort of role in all of this and what they should do to change their behavior?
At the day of our biggest demonstration, we had 35,000 protesters on the field, in the rain, in the wind, fighting against the police over every meter of Lutzerath. And I think that on that day, I was already evicted, and we saw thousands of people who weren't prepared to do this, going into spontaneous mass action of civil disobedience. And I think that's an experience that the body and also the mind, they don't forget. And I think that people really felt what it means that we have to build our resistance from the ground up, because it's not going to come from anywhere else. I mean, what we're talking about now, we need to switch to renewable energies. That's very true. But we also just need to talk about how we can use less energy. Germany is historically the 4th largest emitter. And by emitting more, we're just creating more injustices. Like today, 20 million people a year are being displaced because of the climate crisis. We simply cannot afford to do this any longer. And that's why we know that we have to get out of coal, get out of gas, get out of oil really quickly, but also use less energy. And that doesn't mean turning down your heater. It means turning down the automobile industry in Germany, turning down the weapon industry, et cetera, right? So I think that's what it's all about. And people know that we can't solve this crisis in a capitalist system.
And obviously, Dina, as you outline that, I'm thinking there need to be creative solutions, and they may be challenging, but they need to happen. There are also creative people in our YouTube chat with creative names, such as Uranium Projectile Core, saying, in my opinion, if the German government does coal mining for energy and if there is no other source, it is actually no problem. Gas from Russia also has problems due to war between Russia and Ukraine. So what then should those solutions look like, Maria Inti? And what do you make of that comment, just this idea that if there's no other source, it's actually no problem?
No, it is a problem. It's a big problem to continue burning fossil fuels. So this is not an option. It's not good for our health, as we have seen. It's also not needed for our energy sector. And it is totally detrimental to reach the Paris Agreement of 1.5 degrees and limit global warming to that. So basically, the solutions are scaling up renewables, as I mentioned before. So I don't really care about whether the fossil fuel comes from Russia or from Canada or from Germany. It doesn't make a difference in our atmosphere. Mm-hmm. Our atmosphere is global, and we will have impacts of the climate crisis on a global level. So basically what we need, the solutions are building up renewables all over the world. And there are many countries which people are not aware of, which are leading.
Mm-hmm. And Maria Inti, when we talk about leading, there is a leader I want to talk about, the German Minister for the Economy and Climate Protection, Robert Habeck, I believe. He spoke to journalists earlier and gave a positive outlook for energy security in the country. This was today, I believe. Take a listen.
In the years up to 2031, the German energy supply will be secure. Sufficient energy, electricity, will be available at all hours of the year. And the grid, if it is developed, will be sufficient to transport these quantities of electricity. This also applies on the condition that the coal phase-out should be brought forward, which has been agreed for the eastern German coal fields in 2038. I'm saying it is conditional because there is no agreement on that yet at this point. Even after 2030, we will have phases where we need baseload capable power plants that can always produce. These power plants must and should be climate neutral. That means that they need to use hydrogen. Gas is okay for the transitional phase, but as soon as possible, we will move to hydrogen-fired power generation.
Alexander, very briefly, we're running out of time for the show, but I saw you nodding there. Do you think that the idea of moving towards a hydrogen-fired power in the future is a good idea?
No, this is actually magical thinking, I would call it. So what we see is that at the moment, hydrogen is really on an embryonic scale. So it has no meaning for our energy production, and it will take years, maybe even decades, to have this on a level where we can really use it. And we need to change our energy supplies right now. And that's why we need to reinforce our renewable energies right now. And that's what's not done. And therefore, we need more protests and that people are going on the streets demanding that we put on renewables now.
And I'm sure we will see more protests. Dina, I want to ask you, what do you think the legacy of Lutzerath will be, and what solutions do you hope to see? What do you expect, or what do you want from the government?
We're not only talking about the legacy of Lutzerath, I believe, but about the legacy of an over 10-year-old struggle in Rhineland, in this whole area, against the coal. And I think we're still figuring it out, like what we won, what we lost. But I do believe that people have learned that it's better to be together than to be alone, with all the fear of climate crisis and all the other crises that are happening. And so I think what we have strengthened is the belief that we need to face this crisis with more democracy, really. And for me, like, one creative idea in order to solve this crisis would be to talk about, like, why not democratize companies like RWE. I really believe that if you let the people decide how which energy we should produce, and how then we will have more renewables.
Right, and letting the people decide certainly to me sounds like a creative, novel approach. That's all the time we have for today. So thank you for watching. Thank you to our guests, and see you next time.